All right, it's a little bit early, but I found my working copy that I did this summer, so I did want to show it to you to prove to you and myself that it works. So this is it. It's the same stuff that we've been typing in for the last 2 or 3 days. Now I've got different movies in here. When I did this, I don't know if any of you saw it, but I had taken my daughter to see the, this isn't the name of it, but I had taken my daughter to see the Freddie Mercury movie. I couldn't remember the name, so I just put that in there. All right, but notice if I come in and I edit, so I can come in there and say, oh no, that was 1995. Save my edits, and it's been changed. Okay. I can put in a brand new. Oh, I guess we don't. If I had the add in here, maybe I don't. All right, maybe it wasn't complete then. But the stuff's in here. It works. I took it and put it on this flash drive. So if anybody, I'll just pass it around. If you don't want it, just pass it on to the next person. But if anybody wants it, if you had any problem with yours, then you can copy it on. You can copy the folder onto yours. Okay. All right. With that said, again, I'm going to jump into Chapter 2 of our book. What we're going to do again is I'm going to go through Chapter 2. My guess is it'll take somewhere between an hour and 2 hours. I have no idea how long, but we'll see. All right. When we go through things, all right, I have to count on all of you that if something is wrong, something looks wrong or whatever, or you think I screwed up, please stop me, because I'm never going to do that on purpose. All right? I do it enough without trying to. So, this is Chapter 2, starts around page 11, it looks like. I don't want to read to you out of the book, but the author basically says, hey, the best way to learn this is to go out and start doing it. All right? So that's what this is about. Okay? The author takes it pretty slow, and there's a few times in here where the author will say, well, you know, I'm not going to explain this to you now, but you're going to get it later in the book. And you will. Okay? So don't worry about this preparing Visual Studio thing. I have no idea what he was talking about. I would like you to try to do this with me. And my hope is when we get done, yours will look a hell of a lot better than mine will. All right? So what we are to do here is we are to come in, and this is going to be called Party Invites. So I'm starting up a new Visual Studio. I'm just going to save it to my desktop. So I'm going to create a new project. And again, because I've created some already, I've got my types up here. So ASP.NET Web Application. Next. I want it to go into my desktop or onto my desktop. Does that once in a while. I usually have to close it and put it back open again. Good. And again, they want us to call this Party Invites. One word with a big or a capital P and a capital I. All right? Again, I'm just going to follow the author's lead in here. So, clicking Create. I believe it's another empty one with MVC. I'm 99% sure, but just to be sure. Oops. Empty with MVC. Again, this is the way it used to look. Okay? This is the way it looked back in if we would still have 17. It would look like this. All right? Now, the author also says in here, and again, I don't want to read, but the author, this is about the only place in here the author will say this, and that is that a lot of people might not like the fact that he chooses the empty template, but one of his goals in here is to teach you as much about the language and the way things work as possible. So in other words, for lack of better words, he's taking you under the hood, so to speak, and that's why he does it that way. All right? You've already seen this, so if I come through here now with empty and with MVC and click Create, you know exactly what it looks like, as far as what gets created. All right. If any of you do copy the project from me and you bring it on the system and you run it, and you're like, it doesn't work, the chances then are you had something wrong when you created your database. All right, or you used a different database name than I did. And if it's not one of those, I don't know what it would be. Because if you followed everything, I took this right out of the book. So I would think it should be okay. I mean, I don't want to give you the smart aleck answer. It works on mine. You know, it does, but I want it to work on everybody's. All right. You've already seen this. I'm not going to run the system. I'm not going to run the program. You know right now, and you even know why after we just went through that. You know that there is no view in there with a .cshtml extension. Therefore, if I run the program right now, it will fail. All right. And the author mentions that, even shows you. You've seen this screen already. Okay. All right. He puts this part in here for you, Abby. So, but he talks about using the different types of browsers. This has changed. Okay. It used to pick up every browser that you had. You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to add anything in here. Grace, I think you might have had to too. I don't know. But it used to, if I had 5 browsers listed on here, they would all just be there. And there was nothing I had to do. All right, to get it to work. It would just work. All right. So the first thing the author does is he wants us to come in here and add a controller. So let's add it, then come back and take a look at it. I think it's going to be an empty home controller we call home. It is. All right. So again, I'm backing up. I just wanted to be sure. So adding our first controller, we're coming into here. We're going to right mouse click on our controllers folder. We're going to choose add. We're going to choose controller. Hopefully by now, I know it's only been 3 or 4 days, but that's kind of second nature to you. If I tell you to add a controller, you shouldn't really have questions other than what's it called. All right, and what kind of controller is it? All right, again, the author chooses empty. I already mentioned this to you. If you choose the controller with read-write actions, it's going to give you some baked-in code. It'll give you even more code if you choose those using the entity framework. All right, I showed you that, I believe, the first or second day. But we want to keep the empty one. Click add, then it asks for the name, and we want to call it home. Now, the advantage, quite often, not every, but very often, people, when they create controllers, will have a home controller. For lack of better words, your home controller might show your home page. Does that make sense? Plus, when you think about it, and I'm just going to click add here so it gets created. When I come back out here to app start, it's already got the code in there for a home controller. All right. So when I look here and I go to my route config, it's already got the one in there for home. Okay. It's not that you have to do that though. All right. So my home controller right now is almost empty. Okay. And we have both under controllers. Close that. I've got my home controller plus I have my home folder. We've talked about that before. I don't want to keep talking the same stuff to death. So hopefully that makes sense, what I just showed you right there. So the author goes into some more depth and breadth of coverage over what a controller is than I probably have. So if you're still a little bit confused, I would highly recommend you read this. I will really highly recommend when we get to the point in the book, chapters 7 through 13, when we're doing the project, if you really want what we're doing to make sense to you, that you make sure you read this stuff. Ideally, you're going to read it before we come in and start actually kind of doing it. And the author says, You do not need to follow the conventions that he uses, but he uses, all right, he uses the standard types of conventions to do things. And that's why he says he recommends that you do that. All right, so again, we come in here, we add the controller. It's empty. Okay, thank you. All right. We make it home. So we have this, and unfortunately got cut off there, but you can see that. You already know it's the same thing. What he's saying there is what we get is this. All right. Again, the only one of these that's mandatory is this one, because the system.web.mvc is where this is defined. All right. Now, I'm not going to do this. We did this the first day. He comes through here and he changes that action result to a string, and he just says return hello world. So when you run it, it says hello world. We've already done that. All right, which is why I'm not going to do it again. He talks in here about the random port. You may or may not be aware of this. I put a couple notes in here on my copy of this. I printed off a hard copy because I had some stuff extra stuff I wanted to make sure I mentioned to you. And again, some of it sounds like, well, who cares? And you know what? Maybe you don't. All right. But when you do take a look, as soon as I get this off the screen, when you do take a look in here, come on, there you go. All right. And in the book also, the author mentions right here that port number. All right. What you're actually running is you are using your computer as both a client and a server. You did this once before. When we downloaded XAMPP and we used that last semester, you were doing the same kind of thing. All right. The difference is what we get here is what's called IIS Express, and it's a trimmed down version of IIS, which is the Microsoft product that you can use to run ASP.NET. So you put that on your server. All right. The author says, I'll show you how to deploy an MVC project into production environment in Chapter 13. My hope is that we're able to do that. If that works, then what we're going to be able to do is just put in a URL, and boom, your stuff will be out there on the internet. You'll be able to show people. All right. Now, the author goes in here and talks about routes. Again, we've talked about this already. You should know that now running just the port number or the port number /home or the port number /home/index will all result in the same thing. Everybody should know that by now. All right. There's nothing new right there, in other words. All right. So he explains that here, but I think it's pretty much just what we've talked about in class. All right. So it says the output from the previous example, which we didn't even do, wasn't HTML. It was just that string that we returned, hello world. So it says to produce an HTML response, we need a view. You know how to do this. All right. So we're going to do that. We're going to come into our controller here. We're going to right mouse click on it, and we're going to choose add view. All right. I believe that he just keeps all the defaults. Oh, you see, he turns it back to the way it used to be. We already had that. All right. If you look on the screen, though, this is interesting. I don't know if you know what all that means. I don't know if you'll care after I tell you what all this means. If you run your ASP.NET program and you do not have any .CSHTML file, you saw the error we got. All right, it just basically says it's trying to do slash and there's nothing there. This is what you used to get. So in other words, the system thinks when you run this, you're going to have one of these files. All right, so under Views Home, you've got this, and this is actually the order in which it looks for things. Now, .aspx, that's an ASP.NET Web Form. All right? That both of these, or all of these basically are. Okay? And you know the CSHTML, if we were writing this in Visual Basic.NET as opposed to running this in C#, we'd have VB.HTML instead of CSHTML. All right. So the author says the error message is quite helpful. It explains a lot of stuff it does, but they've changed it. Okay? You don't see all that stuff anymore. So again, add view is what he says to do. Index empty without model, and it looks like he does not want us to use a layout page. All right? And as far as what that means, you know what that means, but he talks about it some more anyway. That's why I said with a lot of this, I don't want to sit there and keep giving you the same lecture. All right? All right. Visual Studio has created a file for us called index.cshtml under the Views Home folder. Yeah. Okay. And the author says here, if this isn't the effect you wanted, if you did the wrong thing, delete it and try it again. I wanted to mention something here. I put a little annotation here. And it may not sound like it's very important, but I just want you to at least hear it. There have been a couple times when I've been working on projects like this that for whatever reason, I created something. So let's say I'm not doing it now, but let's say I wanted to create a new controller. And somehow, in fact, it's never happened with a controller, but it has with models. I want to create a model. And for some reason, instead of right-clicking on models and doing class, I just created a new class. So look up on the screen. If I create a new model, it should be in here. That should make sense to everybody. But I've done it before where for some reason, it doesn't put it any place. It puts it like down here. All right? So I grab all of the associated files and I copy them to the clipboard and then I paste them in here. And it's worked just fine. Now, since I've done that, I've done some reading, and they recommend you don't do that because there's a lot of system files that are being worked with in here too. They say if you somehow screw it up like that and you find it, especially if you find it right away, delete it and recreate it. All right, I'm just telling it to you because it has happened to me before. It may happen to you in the future. It may not. You also know, looking at this, you know what that line of code means. It means we are not currently using any kind of layout. And you also know that I'm not going to do this, but if I run this file right now, all right, if I bring up index.cshtml in the browser, it won't fail. It's not going to show me anything because there's nothing inside of the body, but it will show me my title, which is index. All right, and then just a blank screen. All right. So if you don't like my explanation, okay, the author gives you his right there. I should mention, as he does, again, does everybody get the fact now that because we have surrounded that line layout equal null with the delimiters, the @ curly brace, and we end it there with the curly brace, that is razor code? All right. Now, what he does is he comes in and he says, okay, let's go in here and let's make a div and have it say hello world. So what he has done is instead of, it's easier to show you in here. When he first did this, he had you change this from action result to string. Then he returned a string like hello world. So you ran the program and it said hello world. Does that make sense to everyone? In that case, that controller, the method, the index method of the controller was acting both as the view and as the controller. Then he said, no, let's create an index. And then he wants you to put in this div something like hello world. So all he did was he shifted what he had from having it in the controller to putting it in the view. But he actually did more than that. Now he's at least using 2 of the 3 components. He is using a controller and he is using a view. All right, but what I'm telling you is if I save this and run it, it is going to look just like it would if we went back, remove this, we could even remove the file, just in the controller, change the return type to a string, and put return hello world. All right. And again, what this goes back to, and the reason I'm telling you this, I'm not trying to waste my time. I'm not trying to waste your time. But there are a lot of people who write bad code. They put things in the controller that shouldn't be in the controller. All right. They put things in, they put things in the model that shouldn't be in the model, etc. All right. Well, they said from the view. I didn't, but you get the idea. Now, the author does mention in here, you've seen a little bit of this already. It says we can return other results from action methods besides strings and view results. For example, the author says, if I return a redirect result, the browser will be redirected to another URL. Think about when that would be important. All right? If somebody tries to do something on your website, okay, somebody tries to do something on your website and they put in something they shouldn't. When I say they shouldn't, I don't mean necessarily it's bad, but they put in something your program isn't designed to handle. You could push them off to your error page so that if something weird happens, they go to a generic error page that you create that says a problem has occurred, try again later, or a problem has occurred, contact the administrator, or whatever. All right. All right. The other thing about this is, thus far, everything we've done has been static. Every time you run this program, now it's going to say hello world. Not much to that. So the author says, let's add some dynamicity to it. And that's what you see here on page 23. So the whole point of the web application platform is to construct and display dynamic output. The controller's job is to construct some data, pass it to the view, which renders it as HTML. All right, sends it back basically to the controller that can send it over to the browser. It says one way you can do this, and this is a little more depth, although it's just a paragraph that I went into earlier. The author says is to use that viewBag object. And as he mentions, the viewBag is a member of the controller base class. ViewBag is a dynamic object, which basically means it can change at any time during the program. You can add things to it, you can remove things from it, you can update what's in it. All right? So as it says, you can assign arbitrary properties to it, making those values available in whatever view is subsequently rendered. That's pretty important. For lack of better words, if you put something in the ViewBag, it's like you're making it a global variable. All right? That's the best way. It's not exactly that, but that's the best way I can explain it. All right. So it says listing 2.6 explains passing some dynamic data. So what are they doing in here? All right. They're checking the current time, and then they're grabbing the hour. So if we did it right now, it would be 13, right? It's military time. And then it says here, this is using the ternary operator, rather, the question mark colon operator. This says if the hour is less than 12, the greeting will be good morning. Otherwise, the greeting will be good afternoon. Okay? Then it says return view. So after it does this, it's going to say good morning or good afternoon. Does that make sense to everybody? But then it goes and it calls the view, and it adds whatever stuff we had in the view. All right? So I'm going to just grab this. It's nothing fantastic, but I'm going to grab it just to prove that. Okay, there it is. I'm going to save, and I'm going to run it again. All right. Did we have anything in the view? It says hello world. So what's wrong? File, save all. Okay, let me stop it and run it again. Oh, I always love that when it makes me a liar. Well, let's see what, I must have not done something that the author did. I don't know what that would have been, but, there it is. I need to add that line. Viewbag.greeting world. Okay, my fault. So come back, go into the index file, and change it from hello world to viewbag.greeting world. So that'll say either good morning world, or in our case it should say good afternoon world. And the reason when I did it the first time, hey, I screwed up, but it's actually a good thing. Because the reason it didn't show here, we never told it to show. We're telling it to return whatever the view has. The view just had hello world, correct? So even though we put other stuff in here, we didn't tell it to do anything with that. All right? So now if I save it and run it, it should say good afternoon world. Okay? From the view. If I change the time, I'm not going to, but if I change my time to be, before noon, it would say good morning world. All right? And a lot of what's in this particular book that you'll find, I think if you do want to learn this, all right, and it's funny because when I taught the class last semester, we were talking at the end of the semester, we had a book that I don't think is as good as this book. And I asked, how many of you think you might be interested in going into this, into this field? And there was not a hand that went up. And it was one of those not no, hell no type of ideas. All right? And I think a lot of it was the book. But this is another one of those fields where another one of these languages, it's hard. What does that mean? That means you can make a lot of money if you're good at it. And I don't mean to say that you're going to step out of here, you're going to start, the next Monday as an ASP.NET web programmer and you're going to make 200 grand a year. I don't mean that. But at least you've got a leg up on a lot of people who don't know how to do it. That's all. And it's another thing that you're able to go in and put in on your resume, on your electronic portfolio, etc. All right. But the author does a lot of good stuff in here, where if I'd have read this to you first, I wouldn't have probably screwed it up. He'll oftentimes either right before he gives you some code or right after will give a really good down-to-earth explanation of what's going on. All right. Okay, so far we've done virtually nothing for our application that we're creating here. What they call here this party application. This is what we're going to work on basically for the rest of the chapter. All right. So I don't want to read to you other than to say somebody wants us, we're going to have a New Year's Eve party. We've been asked to create a little app that does these 4 things. All right. You can see them. A home page with party info, a form that we can use to RSVP. When the person RSVPs, we want to be able to get back to them and say either, great, I'm glad you're going to be there, or sorry, you can't make it type of an idea. All right? And we want those RSVPs to be emailed. So in other words, we're going to need a couple things from the user. If I'm sending Luke an invitation to the party, all right, I need some way to know it's Luke, and I need some way to know his email address. So once he comes in and says, I can make it or I can't, I can send the appropriate, the appropriate message back to him. And that's what they're saying. So the author says in the following sections, we'll build the MVC project created at the start of the chapter and add some more base features. So we're going to use what we have. So if you look in here, it says this shows the addition that we've made, and most of the time he does a really good job with this, that he takes and bolds what he's changed. All right, so you shouldn't have to go in there and change everything, but unfortunately, quite often he does this, or part of it's on one page and part of it's on another page. Okay, so I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go back to the index.cshtml file. All right, and after this, I'm going to put in this line, and I'm going to put in this. He breaks a lot of rules. I mean, one thing I was always taught, never put a BR tag in the middle of a paragraph. You know, make it 2 paragraphs. That's not that big a thing. The other thing, now I'm going to do this. You can do this or you cannot do this. It's up to you. As we build this, I have really no desire to always see at the top when you run it, good morning world or good afternoon world. So I'm going to take this line that he put in here earlier. All right. And notice if I try to comment it out, it's still there. Why? Because it's got razor in it. So I'm going to put in @ sign. Oops, get rid of, oops, come on. I'm going to remove this and put in @ sign. Okay, and just comment the thing out. @ All right, and there was an @ sign in there originally. It should all be green when you get done. How's that? Now, when I run it, it's just going to say, we're going to have an exciting party. It says to do, sell it better, add pictures, or something. There won't be pictures in here, but just so you see it. If you don't put that line out, you don't have to, but it's going to say up here then, it's going to say good morning world or good afternoon world, which I just think is kind of silly. All right, but if you want to put it in there, keep true to what the author has, fine. All right. So this will be the first time in this chapter where we'll come in and we'll start working with models. You have already done a little bit of work with models. All right. I will tell you that when we are working on the sports store, I believe we only have one model that's going to represent a table. When we do the project that we're going to do as a class, and then I'm going to let you modify and make kind of your own, we're going to have 5 or 6 tables. All right, so it's going to be much more reminiscent of real life. All right, so the author talks about a model. I say that models hold data stores. He says it's a representation of real-world objects, and they define a subject known as a domain. All right? Maybe his words, maybe his verbiage is better than mine. I don't know. The model, as it says, contains the C# objects that make up the universe of the application and the methods that manipulate them. The views and controllers expose these models to the clients in a consistent manner. So in other words, you're in control of them. We don't need a complex model, it says here, and we don't. So to add the model class, we're going to right mouse click on models. All right. And as it says, we're going to choose add class. And the name is going to be, looks like guest response. Okay. So I'm going to right mouse click on the models folder, choose add, go down to class. And for the name, I'm going to call it guest with a capital G. Append to that the word response with a capital S. I'm sorry, capital R. So it should look like this. All right, we've talked about this before. This is my question to you. Is there anything that's on that screen that people don't understand? I mean, because after a while, I have to figure that I can just go through things, and either you're going to ask or you do get it. All right, we went over what the namespace is, etc. So we've gone over this stuff. Okay, so we want to put this in here. Now, you can look at it a couple things. If you look on the screen, please, before I even put this in there. First of all, it's poorly written. If you were actually putting this in a database, you wouldn't want one single field for your name. Does that make sense to everybody? Because some people are going to put last name first, some are going to put first name last, etc. All right? So you'd probably have separate fields for all that stuff. That's the first thing. Second thing, and I think we've talked about this already, I'm saying it again anyway. Notice after bool there is a question mark. What that means is the will attend can be one of three values. So even though it's a Boolean, it can be true, it can be false, but null is acceptable. All right? If you go into right now, if you go into the grade book for this class, you may already have a grade. If you would have gone into the grade book before class started, all right, so like that morning, let's say, you wouldn't have had a grade. Everybody agree with that? Your grade was null. So when you send somebody a party invitation, they may or may not answer right away. I was amazed. I sent an email out this morning at 2 minutes after 6 to a part of the country that's got a different time zone than we are, and I got an answer in 2 minutes. So they must have 24-hour support there. All right. But if this was a real database, and we're not turning this into a database, but if we were, we'd want to change a little bit the way that the stuff is written. All right. So I'm going to grab this, copy it, and put it right here. Okay. You may or may not have noticed this too. See where it says 0 references? You may have seen that before. It means that right now there's nothing else in the code that's referencing this. All right. So they talk about the nullable bool. I already mentioned that to you. Okay. It says one of my application's goals is to include an RSVP form. Before we do that, this is what we'll do. See this? What you're going to see on the home page is down on the bottom, there will be a hyperlink. That hyperlink will say RSVP now. Okay? When we click that hyperlink, we want to go to something that's called RSVP Form.CSHTML. Please look on the screen. Does it make sense to you? What this is doing is this is an HTML helper method that's going to create a hyperlink. This is the text for the hyperlink. This is where we're going to go when you click it. Does all that make sense? But if you click it when we first put it in, you're going to get an error. Why? What doesn't exist yet? Yeah, the equivalent of the view. That. So you can do it, but it's something we're going to want to link to. So we're going to want to come in and create another file in just a couple minutes. So I'm going to copy, come back in here, go into the index file, down at the bottom, after your paragraph, put that in. All right? Let's save and run it. And you'll notice it looks like it did before, except for the fact it now has this. If you put your mouse there, it even tells you where it's trying to go, down at the bottom of the screen. However, since it doesn't exist, we get an error message. It's even showing you here where it's trying to go. It's assuming that under the home controller, there is a method or there's something or a view, there's something in there that's called RSVP form. There isn't anything, and that's why we're getting the error. So they mention again that this is a helper method. I already talked to you a little bit about what helper methods are. All right, there's something that's been designed for this language to make at least some of the HTML that you have to write, to have it be done for you. So this is what you saw. All right. Again, roll your mouse over it. Yeah, we did that. Nothing new there. Look at what this says. It sounds so innocent. It's just a sentence. But again, it's important to realize this. This is on page 28 near the top of the page. It says, notice that unlike traditional ASP.NET applications, model view controller URLs do not respond correspond, I should say, to physical files. Each action method has its own URL. All right? And MVC uses that routing system that we looked at before to figure out where to go and what to do. All right. So it says when you run it, you'll see either a 404 or something else. In other words, it isn't going to work. All right. So the author says we can do this by adding a method called RSVP Form to the home controller class. Well, would you agree? We've seen that one before, right? You look on the screen, it's had a different name, but you've seen this one before. Since there's really nothing of substance in it, it also says to me we're going to have to build a view for RSVP Form. All right? So I'm going to come in here. Copy that. Whoops, don't know what I did there. Oh, I know what I did there. Okay. That's because it doesn't go in there. All right. So we've got that right here, and somehow I lost a curly brace. Okay, so we just added that into our home controller. Why I keep doing that, I don't know. All right. Now this is something a little different. I don't remember for sure if it works exactly like this, but we're going to look at it. We want to add what's called a strongly typed view. If you look on the screen here, do you notice anything that's in here that looks different from what we did before? The answer is this always said empty without model before, correct? Now it says empty, which means we need a model class. All right? And by doing that, that's not creating a view, it's creating what's called a strongly typed view. In other words, it has some substance to it. All right? Now that may not sound like a very big thing, but please look up on the screen here. When you're going to do that, and I had mentioned this on the first day, but I'm saying it again now. Everybody, do a file, save all, and after you do your file, save all, do a build solution. You have to do that because what that does is it basically says, hey, it grabs all the system files that are necessary, and it either creates them or it opens some kind of a communication path between them. All right. Oops. Hey. So now we can right mouse click on that method and we'll want it to look like this. Okay? So first let me close that. I don't know why I opened it. Okay, it's not even let me close it. That's fine. No. All right. So I'm right mouse clicking on RSVP Form, add a view. Again, instead of empty without model, notice right now I can't even click in here. But as soon as I change it from empty without model to empty, now I can. And I've got my route config, but for the first time, we've seen something else. Guest response. Again, what we're telling it is what we need in this view is some information that's in there. All right, so I'm going to click that one. I think they said to leave the other ones blank. I did. And I'm going to click add. All right, doesn't look really very different from what we have done before. Okay. Just going to close this. Now, he does explain some of this stuff. I've said it before. Again, sometimes it's better to hear it twice, or maybe you trust him and you don't trust me. I don't know. But he shows you in here, all right, in the RSVP Form.CSHTML file, he bolds that line, okay, and he explains basically in there, it's another skeletal HTML file, but it's got a model razor expression. As it says, this is the key to a strongly typed view. We have already done some of this in the last project. All right. All right. It says now that we have this, we can build out the contents. And what's kind of neat in here, if you look on the screen, all right, this using statement, which starts here and ends here, we'll go over it, but what I want you to realize is after we do, come on, and we run this, come on, we'll get that. Now, is that beautiful? Hell no. But it's not bad looking, it's not terrible, and we didn't even have to add any CSS to it. So the system, by using these HTML helpers, was able to make something for us that would look better than if we did it ourselves. All right. So what you can do again, go down to the bottom of page 30, go into the body section, grab that code that's right here. We're going to go back and look at it in just a second, copy it to the clipboard. When you copy it in, and this should make sense to you, all right, when you copy it in right here, we're going to get an error. In fact, a bunch of them, because we only put part of this in there. Okay, you can hit enter, or at least I did. I'm going on to the next page, and I'm going to add the rest of it. All right. Somehow it didn't like this, so I'll just move this over. All right. So let's take a look at what's in here, okay? All right. So it's a form. That's pretty obvious. Your name, and there'll be a text box for the name. All right. Your email, there'll be a text box for the email. Your phone, there'll be a text box for the phone. Does anybody remember? We just talked about this a day or two ago. What's that kind of expression called? Very good. That's a lambda expression. That says we want the name, and we want to place that right there in X. And the email, but since we're doing it one at a time, it's smart enough to work its way through it. All right. Then we come through here. This is a little different. Notice what it says here. It's a drop-down list. Throw all that stuff over a little. It might make it easier to see. Okay? So it's going to be the drop-down, and it's going to say, will you attend? Now, it's only giving you two options. Yes, I'll be there. No, I can't come. It's not asking for a reason. It's not giving you the opportunity to say, I don't know, maybe. So it's giving you a Boolean choice right now. If you say, yes, I'm going to come, that will attend will be true. If you say no, it'll be false. That should make sense. At least hopefully it does to everybody. All right? After we get done, we have the input button, which just says on it, submit RSVP. So again, unless somebody has a question over some of that stuff, all right, I'm going to go on. And I'm looking, and it looks like, at least on mine, I may have, no, not there, sorry, after the import line. There we go. I don't know if I just missed that or what. I'm going to look. I missed this curly brace. See that? That's why mine wasn't working right. I missed the curly brace on the end. But again, this is setting up the form. The author explains this to you. He talks a little bit about lambdas right here. I'm using my words because I figure you can read the book on your own. All right? I'm not being paid to come in here and have me read to you. Now, one thing about using lambdas, look on the screen, please. We just copied that code in. But if you had done this and said x dot, for example, it would have come in and shown you name and phone and email. And that's just important because of the fact if for some reason 1, 2, or all 3 of those weren't being shown, you know there's a problem in your code. All right? And normally if you're writing a program, as you know, if you're a programmer and you're writing a program, you're not going to be able to copy it out of a book. But they're saying here that an advantage to using this is the fact that you have available to you, all right, that you have available to you IntelliSense. All right. Now, again, a little more. You've seen a little of this, but let's talk about it again. It says the HTML begin form generates the HTML form element that's configured to automatically post back. All right. Because I have not passed any arguments, it assumes I want to post back to the same URL. I could give it an argument and have it go to another URL. All right. Maybe, as an example, maybe I want it to be set up so if you say, no, I'm not coming, maybe I want you to go to another form that asks why. All right. That'd be a little overkill, but just so you get the idea. So that is basically writing this for you. That makes sense? That's why it's a helper. All right. Okay, the next thing, this is the first time when I was reading this book, and I had a few of these while I read it, but this is the first time on this page I had one of those wow kind of things. And it's not a big thing, but I want to go through this setting the start URL that's on page 32 because a lot of books don't mention this. I didn't know this even existed until I read it in here. Okay? So the author says in here, Visual Studio will make the browser request a URL based on the view which is currently being edited. This is a hit and miss feature. In other words, by default, when you go to run the program, okay, if you're on a.cshtml file, it'll run based on that file. Does that make sense? And that may or may not be what you want, is what the author is saying. To set a fixed URL, you might think, what do you mean fixed URL? Just give it a second. It says to set a fixed URL, select the properties. Look on the screen if you would, please. What they're saying is click over here and go to Project Properties, right there. So go to Project Properties. All right? That brings this up. These are the property settings for your project. All right? Bless you. And it says to set a fixed URL, select that. Okay. Properties from the project menu. Select the web action. Right there on the left. Select web. All right. And then, because the cool thing is you only have to do this once for each project if you want to. All right. So as it says, select the web action and check the specific page option in the start action category. That one right there. It's a radio button, so that gets selected. And guess what? You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to give it a page. That's all you have to do. All right? And you can close this because it automatically saves what you're working on. If you don't believe me, if I go back to Project Properties, and I go back, notice it's now set to specific page when previously it was set to current page. All right? Again, this is something you can do. It is not something you have to do. All right? Again, it says you don't have to enter a value into the field. Visual Studio will request the default URL for the project, which will automatically be set. So this will always run this from the home page. And if you raise, well, I don't want to do that, then don't set this option. All right. The good thing about that is what's going to happen occasionally is if your user will also, if you're eventually doing this for an end user, so they're always going to start from the home page. And I don't know about you, but that makes sense to me. That's where I'd want them to start from. All right. So he showed it there. I already shown it to you. So, all right. So what we're going to do now, if you would please, is go back to your project, do a file, save all, and run it. This should get us to the index or home page. Now, though, if we click RSVP now, there we have it. Again, you can come in and add CSS to this. You can come in and use Bootstrap with this, etc. That's not what the author is really concerned with right now. All right? And you'll see that choose the option. Yes, I'll be there. No, I can't come. All right? And right now, we're not telling it to do anything with this. You notice this? Watch what happens here. So I'll just put this in, my email. Just put in my work number here. Okay, it's not letting me. There it is. All right, now I'll say, sure, I'll come. Yes, I'll be there. All right. Now watch what happens when I click submit. You say nothing happened. It did. We didn't tell it to do anything with that information. It posted it right back to itself. Maybe you've done that before with HTML or other forms if you don't tell it to go anywhere. It's like saying form, and when you say action equals and you leave it blank or you put in a pound sign, that's basically what we just did. All right, let's do this section on handling forms so we can take another break then, okay? All right, the author says, I have not told MVC what I want to do when the form is posted to the server. As things stand, it's what I just showed you, so I'm not going to read that to you. All right. It says here, and I'm on page 34, to receive and process submitted form data, we're going to use what the author calls a clever feature. We're going to add a second RSVP form action method in order to create the following. All right. Notice here, it's very similar to what we just did on the project. There's a get and there's a post. The get, as it says, is responsible for displaying the initial blank form. That's what we've done so far. On the other hand, the post is going to handle what happens when we click the submit button. That's what they're saying. All right. So what do we have to do? First thing we want to do is we want to go and add this using statement to our controller, our home controller. So I'm going to grab it. You can type it in yourselves. It doesn't matter. So I'm going back to the home controller, and I'm going to add that. All right, if I want to be really picky, I probably would put it at the top just so that it's in alphabetic order. Okay? You don't have to. It's no big thing one way or the other. All right. One kind of neat thing next semester, when we're using Android Studio, it automatically alphabetizes stuff for you. This doesn't. There might be some setting for it. I've never seen it if there is. All right, so we added this, using party invites model. Notice it's gray, meaning that right now we're not using it because we haven't put the associated code in yet. All right, but we're going to add get right here to the top one we've already got in, and then we're going to do post. All right, what does that mean? Well, when you look here, for the RSVP form, we're going to add get. So bracket HTTP get. All right. And then underneath that, we're going to put the post. Now, right now, it's not doing much. Okay, that's okay. We'll work on that in just a bit. All right. It is recommended. I think you can leave the get off here, but it's recommended when you have both. Okay, to put the get in there. A couple other things. It's kind of always practice to do the get before the post. And finally, I showed you this in the last project. I'm saying it again, then we're going to break. Look on the screen, please. Almost always the get has nothing passed in. Almost always the post does. Those two cannot be the same. If I said public view result RSVP form paren, and I said it again, that is not overloading a function or a method, because it would have the same signature. The signatures must be different. We've talked about this before. And good, bad, or indifferent, you're going to see this next semester because Java does it the same way. All right. So the author says here, I have added the HTTP GET attribute to my existing action method. This tells MVC that this is the one used only for GET requests. Then we added the overloaded one, which was to handle the post. We also imported the party invites model namespace. If we didn't do that, we would have to, before some of the stuff we were going to write, we'd have to type in party invites dot models dot something. So by importing this with the using statement, it's just a little less writing we have to do. Do you remember, those of you who were in my C# class, do you remember last year when we said one of the first things we did when we learned console apps was we used that static, whatever the heck it was, static system.console? Remember that? We did that so we could just type in read line or write line. So we didn't have to type in console.readline or console.writeline. All right? So we've looked at it before. This is a good place to stop. It's 2:35. Let's come back at 2:50, please. We'll pick it up on page 35 using model building.